Good morning. I love the end of that gospel. Unbind him. And let's let those words just hang in the air for a moment. What would it look like to be unbound? What would it look like to be unbound in your own life? And what would it look like to be the instrument of unbinding in somebody else's life? You know, my wife and I, we started a nonprofit called Closer Walk, and we do homeless outreach in Chinatown, in Salinas. And originally, Closer Walk was meant to be, I need to be having a closer walk with my Lord. And then after being down there for a little bit, I very quickly realized that the closer walk I was called to was a closer walk with the people in Chinatown. That the only way I would get closer to the Lord was by entering into the lives of the people who were down there. And I'll share a little bit about Closer Walk in a few moments, but these readings are just so incredible. They deserve just a couple moments of looking at. You know, first, Ezekiel. Ezekiel is the first Old Testament writer to have written outside of Israel. He was one of the original exiles in Babylon, and he was writing in Babylon. He was writing to people who were trying to make sense of why their country had been overrun and taken away. And this part, our hope is lost and we are cut off completely. And I understand that. You know, they thought they were the favored nation, and now they're in Babylon, taken away from their land. Our hope is cut off. And the image he gives back to them is one of hope. As we've lost hope, he brings them hope. And the image of the bones growing flesh and sinews and muscles. But it needs more than just bodily flesh to become alive. They need the breath of God back in them. And he says to them, the breath of God will rise them back to life. And I'm going to hold on to that metaphor. Are we breathing in the breath of God? And what's interesting about Ezekiel is the people he was talking to were never going to see this hope. It was going to be 50 or 60 years later that this hope would be manifest. And yet the people who received it still heard it as good news. Even if it wouldn't be for them, it would be for their children and grandchildren. God was on the move. And then we get to Lazarus. There's just a couple of points in this gospel that I want to point out. One of them I think is hysterical. Martha keeps getting everything wrong. Jesus is like, do you believe? She's like, yes, I know he'll rise again on the last day. And Jesus is like, I'm here now. And she doesn't quite get it. And then later when Jesus says, all right, open the tomb. And Martha says, no, Lord, he's going to stink. She's not getting it. But she believes. And she has faith. And the message that I received from that is, when we get to heaven, you're not going to be given a theology test, thank God. You're going to be given a love test. Did you believe? Did you love? Because even though Mary couldn't quite conceive what Jesus wanted to do, she trusted that what he was going to do would be miraculous. Do we have that same level of trust? Do I? And the next one that I think is amazing is Jesus knows what he's going to do. Okay, he's not coming there for any reason other than to raise Lazarus back to life. Now, if it's me and I'm Jesus and I walk up and I see all these people crying, I say to myself, ha, 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 watch how I turn the tables on this. They're going to love this. I've got this going on. They're going to be so shocked. And I'm kind of a little proud of myself and feeling like this is going to be a good show, right? But Jesus does the opposite. He doesn't sit there and forget about their pain because he knows what he's going to do. He enters their pain. And it says he wept. He was moved. And it's a question for me, do I weep at the pain of others? Do I realize that Jesus, who is the author of all healing, allowed himself to be moved by others, allowed his heart to be moved, even though he knew the solution was coming? He first came in solidarity with people. And I kind of realize now that I've been in Chinatown, until I weep with those who weep, mourn with those who mourn, I'm never going to truly see Jesus. Because he is weeping with them. And then the last part I think is just beautiful. Unbind him. Jesus brings out Lazarus, but he doesn't bring him out completely ready to go. He is still bound up. He gives the people the job of doing the unbinding. Now imagine if the people back there said, no, Lord, we don't want to unbind. He doesn't deserve it. Or how about this? Lord, you know what? You didn't heal my father when he died, so why should I help this guy? I mean, how many excuses can we use? Or maybe Mary and Martha are going to go, Jesus, there might still be some maggots around. We don't want to unbind him. You do it, Jesus. I mean, we have a million excuses for not wanting to unbind people. But Jesus says, no, you need to trust me. And when I've called you to unbind, you go unbind. You are entering into my mystery. Well, the same is true of the homeless. I mean, how many excuses do we have for not unbinding? Hey, somebody's out of jail, but I'm not going to give them a job because I can't trust them. Hey, that person used to be an addict. I'm not going to help out. What if I get hurt? You know, I was asking people excuses as to why they don't get more involved. Fear. And I get it. That's a real fear. Lack of time, lack of capability. You know, David, I just don't know if what I'm going to do is good enough, and I don't want to make a fool of myself. Or what if you are willing to help out this much, but they ask for this much? It's just easier to send a check, isn't it? All right, no, David, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down, I'm going to make food, and I'm going to hand it out to people. And as soon as it's over, I'm going to go home. Not going to ask their names, not going to ask their stories, not going to sit down with them. But are we keeping them bound up by doing that? And that's one of the reasons why we started Closer Walk. I was on an 8-day silent retreat, and I'm sitting in front of a statue of Jesus. I'm like, Lord, what do you want for my life? And an image of a homeless person sitting on a bench popped in my mind. And I said, all right, Lord, what do you want me to do for this person? I said, I'm a lawyer. I can help them. Do they need a record expungement? Do they need Social Security help? And I just heard God say to me, I don't want you to do anything for that person other than to sit next to them and listen to their story. I'm like, no, God, that's too easy. No, seriously, what do you want me to do? And again, I heard God say, I want you to sit next to that person and listen to their story. I was like, how can that help? But I said yes, and my wife and I said yes. We went down to Chinatown, and what we found was a lack of hope. We found a spiritual problem. We didn't find drug addiction, although we found that, but that wasn't the main thing we found. We found a lack of hope. And if you don't have hope for tomorrow, who cares what you inject in your body today? And so we said, all right, let's just be present to people. So I went up to one guy and I said, because I'm a really good Christian, right? I'm like, can I pray for you? And he looks at me, he's like, who the heck do you think you are that you're so good that you can pray for me, that God's going to hear your prayers? Come on, get over yourself. And I'm like, what? Wasn't the reaction I was expecting. So I said, can you pray for me? And he's like, you'd let me pray for you? I'm like, yes. And he prayed over me. And then when I was done, he was done doing that, he's like, can you pray for me? And I realized in that moment, all he wanted was an invitation. You know, I had a guy come up to us once, and he's just screaming at us, and he's dropping, curse word after curse word. And I'm from New York City, and he's making me blush. And he's screaming, and then finally he walks away. And I'm just like, what happened with that guy? And one of his friends came up to me and he said, David, be patient with him, because he knew I was mad. And he said, when he was 9 years old, he was severely sexually molested and had a schizophrenic break with reality, and he's been like that ever since. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to preach to that guy. I'm going to sit next to him and just say, hey, whatever happened, brother, you're loved. Another guy came up to me. He said, I want to share with you my story. And I'm like, I'd love to hear it. Then he runs away. Comes back a half an hour later, high as a kite. And I'm like, yo, what's going on? He goes, I just can't share my story sober to you. It's just too hurtful. And he shared his story. And it was like, and you just realize that everybody down there has such pain, and they want to share it. They just don't believe that we want to hear it. I had another guy, and this is the last one of the stories I'll share. I was just to talk to him, like, hey, tell me more about your life. My life's boring. He would never share. Until one day I started talking about my own journey with cancer. And I don't know how we got talking to about it, but I'm missing half my large intestine, so I have a permanent colostomy bag. And he starts cracking up. He's like, me too. We started laughing about our bodies breaking down. Next thing I know, he's telling me about his kids he doesn't see anymore and his heroin addiction, and he just wants to be listened to. It's like, I get it. So we just sit there in Chinatown now with coffee every morning, and we just hang out and listen to people. We hand out oatmeal and clothing, but every now and then someone knocks on the door. We had a woman whose boyfriend was murdered last year, knocked on the door and said, I'm ready for Christ, I need him. I had a guy come into my office a couple days ago and talk for an hour and a half. He's like, I'm tired. And what they're looking for is rebirth and life. But God is calling on you to unbind them. He's calling on me to unbind them. And it can't just be, hey, thoughts and prayers. It's got to be more. Last night we had 100 people down there for dinner. Somebody rented a taco truck, but there was a church from San Jose, and they were just praying over people. And we had praise and worship going, and we had some Catholics and some non-denominationals and a couple of Baptists and somebody from Compass all in a band together, like body of Christ, and they were just having fun. The question that I've got for you is, will you join us in your own way? Will you help unbind? You know, the 8th chapter of Romans that we listened to today, if the Spirit of God, who can raise Christ from the dead, is in your bodies also, but he's also in the bodies of the homeless, do you trust that God can bring them back? Do I trust? Because I still get surprised when I'm down there. Look what God's doing! Like, you'd think I'd get it by now, and I'm still shocked and surprised. Will we unbind them? One of the women I was talking to the other day, 65 years old and just had a stroke. She's living in a tent. I talked to 2 30-year-old women who are 7 months pregnant, living in a tent. Are we going to unbind them? Come on down. I got a chair and a cup of coffee waiting for you. Nothing else. But someone that you can talk to. And one thing that I've learned from my time down there, as I've unbound people, the great lesson I've learned is that it was me who needed to be unbound. And they have taught me more about me and about Christ than I had learned in my first 50 years of life. What it means to love, what it means to be present, what it means to let God unbind me through my unbinding of others. And I would invite you into that mystery as well. Thank you so much, and God bless you.